No, I won't go on, I promise you. So Stockton, pictures, early pictures. The second Gurdwara that came up was in El Centro. Again, after 1946, the expectation was more people would move there, but the conditions were hard and not many people moved there. But nonetheless, the point I'm making is they are here to stay. They are building their institutions. They are establishing scholarship in Berkeley. They bought a house for Sikh students and other Indian students to stay so that they don't need to pay rent while they go to school at Berkeley. They are paying the local hospital. And that all that what I started from with, the idea, the sense of participation in the local society is sort of inherent in Sikh thinking. You work hard, you produce, and then you share the fruits of the labor with everybody around. And just to give you some sense, why is this important for me? That as they are building their gurdwaras, the architectural norms are undergoing change. Sometimes they know it, sometimes they don't. But interesting evolution is taking place. And they're also reviving the old forms. So you know this area, I'm sure you passed by this as you go to the Bay Area. They feel very strongly that their participation is important. So we recognize where they are. I mean, the sort of the tide of the turban right there where the action is. And it was nice. I was present at that time walking from here to the hill. It's a parade in New York. Again, the idea of participation. We are here. We are here to stay, right? The symbols are coming together, the American flag and the Sikh flag. Their participation in interfaith activity. They are adopting other ways to reach the mainstream. At a very successful exhibition at the Smithsonian that ran for 3 years. Another exhibition was here in our own Museum of Asian Art in San Francisco. There was a hugely successful exhibition in Victoria and Albert Museum in 1999. The first program started at Columbia University in 1987. There was this, we created this Columbia Sikh Student Association, and they are participating in the parade. So they are going to the universities as we speak. Several chairs in North American universities which sort of focus work in the area. And we don't have very many community people here, but we have some of them. Dr. Kush, one of the sort of leading figures in rice breeding, is with us today, and I sort of remember reading his work and knowing about his research when I was a little boy of 10 years or so, and I think it's people like Dr. Kush need to be roped in to do something at Davis too. It is happening. It has to happen, and particularly in a large South Asian program like this. Dr. Kush, we need to be looking into this and reach the community. But nonetheless, that is what they are doing. First class in Sikhism at Columbia. You see somebody sitting here, his beard was black at that time. So it was sort of 99, our first class in Punjabi. And then we come to 2001, and sort of a new period begins. The past decade has been difficult. The first victim to fall was a Sikh. And then, there are a number of organizations which have sort of cataloged the incidents of harassment of the Sikhs. Difficult times, there's something which we people didn't know. I grew up, it was sort of 1971, even before that, 1965. Dr. Kosh, you might remember, I come from a border town, and in the middle of the night, Pakistan and India, they fought a couple of wars. They could never go beyond 10 days because their sort of arsenal would dry up. But during those 10 days, as I said, I come from a border town. A Pakistani plane would come. My town was small, and the army could not spare an anti-aircraft gun. So in the middle of the night, we'll wait for the plane to come. It will come and throw some bombs, and in the morning, we will go and see those bombs would be made in USA 1948, and none of them would open up. They would just be falling there. And then some sort of police people would come and gather them. But something like that was never seen here. And the whole nation underwent this very difficult addressing of the issue, and the Sikhs somehow had to bear the brunt of it. But nonetheless, there were two positions. One was to complain, and the other one was, not really, this is our problem, let's face it. So I remember after September 11th, I had just happened to have a lecture at Berkeley, and Steve Polis called me, I think it was 14th or 15th, I forget what the date was, but just a matter of a couple of days. And UC was not closed. So he called me saying, are you up to it to come? I said, are you up to it to having me? He said, yes. So I drove from Santa Barbara, came to Berkeley, and gave my lecture. They were expecting 100 people, only 30 people sort of showed up. But nonetheless, was I not nervous? Of course I was. But it was very clear to me that that is what needs to be done. That is the only way to resist it. If we start if our lifestyle undergoes, fundamental changes, that won't do any good. And so it's always important and interesting to confront these situations. In San Francisco, they put up some sort of cabin in which they would make me pass through, and also sort of breeze would pass through it, and I would come out and tell those people, one of these days, my beard is going to fly away, and I'm going to sue you. I'll move on, and they will laugh, and we will go on. But nonetheless, a difficult period. But the problems are that they are national problems, and Sikhs happen to sort of come in that. And then we are tragedy. What are the responses to the tragedy within the Sikh community? Sort of varied degrees. Fear? Yes. Complaints against racism? Yes. How the Indian press covered it, that's something for you to look into. People looking for term papers. How the American press covered that. CNN was on it the whole day. Proper coverage. Your New York Times called me asking for an op-ed. I was traveling, couldn't do it. But the simple fact that they felt the need of having it there, and they looked me up and contacted me saying we need something, and I said I'm on the move, just can't do it. LA Times did something. Even our Santa Barbara news press, finally by the time I was able to come home, wrote something, and they published it with great degree of sort of, prominence, the press covering it, the television covering it. Where does it all go? Is it that the mainstream American society is anti-Sikh? The answer is not hard to come by. I remember talking to my friends in Milwaukee. I'm going to talk at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee next week on this issue with more focus here. I said, hey, how could we do that? How could we say that the mainstream is anti-Sikh? I said, my simple reason is that if you have seen the pictures, that Gurdwara is 17,000 square feet covered area. 17,000 square feet covered area. That could not have come up if the city of Milwaukee per se was the resistant to this community. Are we on the same page? Just a simple, again I looked at the ground. 17,000 square feet is my house, is probably 1,100 square feet, I believe, is it? Maybe a little bigger than that. But nonetheless, 17,000 square feet covered area is huge area. So, what is it? Yes, there is bigotry in the society. Yes. But that's not just the problem of the Sikhs, that's the mainstream problem. And these are part of the package which the Sikhs will have to get used to. You know, we're talking about everything. 3 debates have come and gone by. I haven't heard anything about assault weapons. We need to somehow, we all need to have access to them because we want to kill rabbits. But nonetheless, I mean, those issues are there. So in a way, there is on the one hand, that bigotry is there, but on the other hand, that needs to be put in place. There is the mainstream, which is very deeply agonized. The Milwaukee churches all gathered, stood behind the community. They all came there as a part of solidarity. So somewhere in that perspective, there was this whole view of looking back. And my point is, looking back won't help. India, they can have demonstrations in front of the US Embassy, if you know, but that's, that's a joke. That's not the issue here, that the demonstration is required in Delhi, that American administration, government is not protecting its citizens and they need help from there. That's not really the issue here. The issue here is for the mainstream community is anyway supportive and cooperative, but there are problems which need to be addressed. And I think as the sort of time is passing by, the Milwaukee community, I'm in close touch with them, and they come to realize that there is support behind them. Yes, these are difficult times. Yes, there are these issues nonetheless, but they need to be handled. And I think at that point, number of people wrote to me after the event, my students, and I just would bring my presentation to close with a quote from one of these letters. And here's this young lady writing to me. I don't know how better to communicate the overwhelming horror and immediate tears that overtake me when I imagine little kids and their moms hiding in terror while members of their congregation and community die around them. I am so sorry. I am sorry that you have dedicated your life to teaching and that there is still so much hateful ignorance. I am sorry that innocent people lost their lives. I am sorry that you are the only Sikh I know and that I feel like I need to apologize to you for our country's failings. And my answer to her touching note was, no apologies are necessary. We all are in it and we must face it together. Thank you very much.
I'll be the moderator for the panel, and what we're going to do is introduce the three panelists one at a time, and they'll have 10 minutes to make their comments. And I've asked them to please stick to the time because we do want the students to have the opportunity to engage all of you on the various issues at stake. First, we'd like to thank them for agreeing to share their thoughts here. And first up is Professor Jack Chin. He's a professor of law here at UC Davis. He teaches and writes on issues of immigration, race, and law. And I would also say, as is evident from his presence here, he's been a long supporter of the social sciences here at Davis, so I'll invite him now to talk.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I realize that I don't have much of what I have to say has already been covered by Dr. Mann, but nevertheless, I'm going to try and give you a short version of a long story about the legal treatment of Asians in the United States under U.S. law. From 1790 until 1952, the privilege of citizenship by naturalization was restricted on the basis of race. In 1790, the first Congress passed one of the first acts of the new Congress after the United States was created, and President George Washington signed a law that said that only free white persons could become U.S. citizens after birth. In 1868, that privilege was extended to persons of African nativity and descent. And so after that, the group of people who were not allowed to naturalize was essentially Asians. In the 1923 case of United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind, which we heard something about already and got to see a picture of the protagonist, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled that a person of Indian race who was born in Punjab could not become a U.S. citizen. And this is what they said. This was the reason for the decision. It is a matter of familiar observation and knowledge that the physical group characteristics of the Hindus render them readily distinguishable from the various groups of persons in this country commonly recognized as white. The children of English, French, German, Italian, Scandinavian, and other European parentage quickly merge into the mass of our population and lose the distinctive hallmarks of their European origin. On the other hand, it cannot be doubted that the children born in this country of Hindu parents would retain indefinitely the clear evidence of their ancestry. It is very far from our thought to suggest the slightest question of racial superiority or inferiority. What we suggest is merely racial difference, and it is of such character and extent that the great body of our people instinctively recognize it and reject the thought of assimilation. The Supreme Court said that the racial restriction on naturalization was a rule in force from the beginning of our government, a part of our history as well as our law, welded into the structure of our national polity by a century of legislative and administrative acts and judicial decisions. Then I want to turn to immigration. Originally, the United States was a land of open borders. From 1776 or before until 1882, anyone who wanted to come to the United States could simply come in any numbers. There were no qualifications or restrictions. When the United States did start to regulate immigration, the purpose was to keep Asians out. Beginning with the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. I want to give you a sense of what was behind the law. One senator supporting the law stated, "It is not numbers that are needed. Quality is more important than quantity. One complete man, the product of free institutions and high civilization, is worth more to the world than hundreds of barbarians. Upon what other theory can we justify the almost complete extermination of the Indian, the original possessor of all these states? I believe that one such man as Newton or Franklin or Lincoln glorifies the creator of the world and benefits mankind more than all the Chinese who have lived, struggled, and died on the banks of the Long Ho." At that period of time, there was a political division. There were some people who said that racial restriction on immigration was bad, and they pointed to the language of the Declaration of Independence that said that all men, all persons are created equal. And there was a response to that, a very quick response. The Founding Fathers' conduct towards the Aborigines of this country, whom they found in lawful occupancy here when they came, must be construed as fixing a limit to the meaning of their public declarations upon the rights of man. When they declared that all men were created equal and were endowed by their Creator with the inalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they undoubtedly meant all men like themselves, and in like manner joined in the bonds of civil society. And when they dedicated this country to be an asylum for the oppressed of all nations, they undoubtedly meant all nations whence they came, peoples of character and conditions similar to their own. So this was a discussion about Chinese. The Chinese Exclusion Act was a piece of legislation about Chinese, but it turned out to have broader implications. When Koreans and Japanese started to immigrate at the turn of the 20th century, they were excluded through the exchange of a series of diplomatic notes. And then, as we saw in this presentation, the next major group to start coming in numbers from Asia were Indians. And at that time, the Congress considered passing an Indian Exclusion Act, much like the Chinese Exclusion Act, to keep out Indians. But instead, they opted for a more systematic solution. Congress determined that no alien who was racially ineligible to citizenship could immigrate. And so they used the racial restriction on naturalization as a bar to immigration. And so with few exceptions, no one who traced their ancestry to Asia was allowed to immigrate to the United States. And so you see cases like the 1937 decision of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, right here in California, where a person named Kishan Singh was a Sikh, arrested and charged with being deportable. And the proof of deportation, the evidence that warranted his deportation, was simply the fact that he was of the Indian race. That was enough. And he would be deportable unless he could prove he came to the United States before the prohibition on aliens ineligible to citizenship,